this is not a part, even though this is not a part of the 12 recommendation from European Union, I think this is very important for countries like Georgia, who is not a candidate yet, but expecting the candidate status announced at the end of the year. And what we see, unfortunately, in recent years is that Georgia, who was champion in terms of alignment for many years with the EU, we have dropped down, and actually right now we have almost like 31% of the alignment, which is very low. And this was actually mentioned by commissioner as well, who visited Georgia. Having said that, I would like to introduce our speakers. Unfortunately, today we're missing Donna Michelidze, who could not attend our briefing because of her other commitment. But she, instead of her, we will have Bizina Lebanidze, who is a senior research fellow at Georgian Institute of Politics. And then, of course, our first speaker will be Mr. Michael Emerson from CEPS, where he's a senior affiliated researcher. And then we will have a second speaker, Mr. Petras Ostriavicius, who will join us soon. Basically, I would like to ask all of the speakers, as it was announced, since this is a meeting specifically for Georgian media and civil society representatives, basically to define actually why the EU common and foreign and security foreign policy is important in general, like for EU countries, and especially for aspiring countries like Georgia, and actually what Georgia should be doing in order to be in line and to increase the alignment with EU common foreign and security foreign policy. Having said that, I would like now to turn to Mr. Michael Emerson. So each speaker will have 10 minutes, and then we will probably go for Q&A. And especially since Petras has to leave very soon, I will probably turn after Petras to give the a chance to the audience to ask the questions to Michael and Petras, and then later we can continue with Zina's intervention. Michael, floor is yours. So please, can you kind of like explain us some sort of major things about the common foreign and security foreign policy from European side, and why this is important for Georgia, and how Georgia actually could be in line with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cornelie, and congratulations to you and the Georgia Institute for Politics for raising this issue as explicitly as you do now, because this is warranted. Up until recently, the chapter, one of the 30 or so chapters of the enlargement process entitled Common Foreign and Security Policy, CFSP, has been the most insignificant and boring box-ticking exercise that was never of any consequence in accession negotiations until now. That, dear friends, has now changed. And now the issue of Georgia's alignment or non-alignment becomes, in my judgment, an issue for Georgia's accession aspirations of importance comparable to the domestic political issues, the oligarch rule of law, and all of that. How do we get there? Okay, a word on the origins. This chapter is really started by checking conformity of candidate states with the EU's position in declarations or resolutions of the United Nations and other statements on foreign policy. I make the distinction here between, if you like, classic diplomacy and the EU's effective external relations, because this concerns, this chapter, if you like, technically concerns only these rather classic diplomacy questions whereas the red meat of much of the EU's external relations is in such fields as climate, sanctions, aid, of course, to Ukraine, and so forth. So there is really big stuff there, which is not actually in this chapter, but in other chapters. Now, you asked me to explain a little bit how this works, how the CFSP works. I'll just a few remarks on that, because I really want to get to the real political question that you're raising, namely, how important is this increasing non-alignment as documented in Eka Akobia's excellent paper, which you all have links to. I don't know how many people have looked at it, but I have. It's a very valuable contribution. Well, just a word on the institutional setup, how it all works. I guess virtually everybody here present is aware that this is a 2.5-act story. There's the Council of Member States, number one. There's the European Commission, executive, number two. And in between, there's the Foreign Office of the European Union, otherwise known as bureaucratically the European External Action Service. This cumbersome name was invented because the idea of calling it the European Foreign Office was deemed too much for those jealously guarding the traditional prerogatives of the member states' foreign offices. Well, enough on that. Now, the result is that of this 2.5 institutional setup is that in the middle of it all is Joseph Borrell, who has the cumbersome title of High Representative of the Council and Vice President of the European Commission. So this service is split both ways. And although it's complicated, it kind of works. There's some tensions, but not very big ones. Right, now the issue really, how important is this box-ticking exercise now in the case of Georgia in relation to its new aspirations to get candidate status and become a full member state? Well, for quite a number of years, the most serious roadblock impeding Georgia's progress towards accession to the EU has been your domestic politics, and in particular the oligarchical structure of power and state capture, which carries on and is a problem which is not resolved and remains a formidable obstacle for Georgia to overcome. But alongside that, now we have this CFSP business, which in my judgment has to be elevated alongside the domestic political issues as co-equal hazards for, well, how did that happen? Well, of course, it is because of the war, Russia's war over Ukraine. Georgia has for a long time tried to navigate between or with both the EU and with Russia, where you have, of course, huge economic interests and personnel, people living, Georgians living in Russia. Now, what has actually happened? I refer now to Eka Akobia's excellent paper. She notes that in recent times, the EU has issued 26 declarations or statements or decisions, many involving sanctions, addressed to Russia. And Georgia has abstained from 23 out of the 26, okay? And then in addition, Georgia has abstained from the EU position taking on Belarus, Kazakhstan, and the Nord Stream, which are therefore collateral related issues. As if that was not enough, for some reason that I haven't yet really understood, maybe Corneli or somebody else can help us on this, Georgia has disassociated itself from EU statements on Burundi, Guinea, South Sudan, and Zimbabwe. Now, somewhere there's a crucial difference in perception of Georgian interest in Zimbabwe versus the EU's interest. Is that so? I don't get it. Is it just that the Foreign Office is not really trying or being negligent? I don't know. But that adds
what we hear
a little bit more detail to the irritation, if you like, of this non-alignment by Georgia, which is on a declining trend. There's a very useful graph in Ecker's paper in which Ukraine's conformity is going up almost 100%, and Georgia's is, I'm afraid, going down. Now, the question is, what is the European perception of this? We leave it to Dirk Schubel maybe to make some official statement on this, if he can. But from my standpoint as an independent observer, there is very serious concern that if Georgia hypothetically is coming into the EU, it would, on today's positions taken by your government, be regarded as risking being a Russian Trojan horse. I mean, the EU has enough difficulty with accommodating Hungary and Poland on different issues, including Russia-related issues. The last thing the EU needs is more member states who will fill out an alliance of countries who will veto actions regarding Ukraine and Russia. So this is why this issue, dear friends, is now co-equal with the problems of domestic governance in terms of its importance as impediment to Georgia's accession aspirations. The Commission, in its recent report on this chapter, said that Georgia was moderately prepared. In my view, that was an excessively generous statement. I think basically Georgia is not aligning, full stop, on matters of major geopolitical significance. So this comes now to the final question. What about the aspirations of the Georgian people who are pro-European in their majority? We are informed, and certainly of think tanks like yours, Corneli. What to do about this? Well, you have an election coming up in exactly 1 year's time. And my judgment from afar is that if your people are seriously and extensively majority pro-European, then they, for God's sake, have got to get their act together in relation to the fragmented opposition parties who are not getting their act together, unless I've missed something. Because this October election is basically your last chance for a long time to correct both the problem of domestic politics, the oligarchical state capture, and this non-alignment. And without fixing both of these, Georgia will not progress along, maybe get candidate status, but that's not operational, as you know, that's a symbolic thing. So this is really my message to the Georgian, think tanks, but indirectly through you to the Georgian people. If you're seriously pro-European, and if this accession demand is really serious, then you've got to work out the consequences of it for how your political opposition gets its act together fast. Now, it could still be done. You've got a year to play with, but that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for very interesting input. And I would like to welcome now Petros, who just joined us. And I would like to turn to you about the same question. I'm sure you already got the questions before. So basically, how do you see this process? Basically, Georgia is kind of aspiring to get the candidate status, and then we have like this non-alignment with the EU foreign and foreign policy, which is not part of this 12 recommendation, but this is very important, as Mr. Borrell mentioned. So what is your take on this? What is yours?
Thank you, Cornelia, and thank you to organizers of this interesting and indeed definitely important discussion, especially in the times when we await for European Commission's assessment on countries like Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova, and probably more generally speaking about the enlargement as a whole. You know, Georgia expressed its wish and readiness to join the European Union, which is not just an economic union, it is a political union. And within this political union, we have some policies which are about the foreign and security policy. So it's indispensable part of the need to align national foreign and security policy with the European Union one. Otherwise, I mean, you will fall apart and you will look like a bit different, not integrating into something which you want to be a part of. I mean, judging from the, in particular, recent statements of the European Commission and many EU politicians, European Union is getting more as a global union, geopolitical union. And here comes the point, which, to my mind, it's rather challenging for present Georgian government policy. And I have some arguments about this. Firstly, EU sanctions against Russia and like in Georgia was not fully implemented. I mean, Georgia, kept its own position on this important European Union policy line, which is not to be underestimated, since the Russian war of aggression has a global and very deep and long-term impact on the European Union. So we'll look for partners who are along with us, together with us, withstanding Russia's war of aggression. And it's not by choice, it's not cherry picking, right? I mean, for any candidate country to align itself with the foreign policy of the European Union, which in terms of response to Russia is existentially important. So that's why it's even about loyalty. I mean, loyalty to the club, which you, I mean, Georgia, wants to join. Secondly, a matter of choosing so-called strategic partners. It was a big decision, so to say, from the Tbilisi side to call China as a strategic partner in times when we are to make a new strategy about the EU strategy about relations with China, calling China as a rival, sometimes even in a stronger terms, rightly so. China is not at all, political partner and affiliated partner with the European Union when it comes to many, many issues, and not to speak about the situation with Russia. China's policy line is very challenging. It's at the best, it's quiet towards Russian aggression against Ukraine. We don't know exactly what is going on under the carpet, and the recent visit of North Korean leader to Russia it can't go without being noticed or approved from Beijing. So that's why we have many reasons to be concerned about actions from Georgian government to call China as a strategic partner. Well, my advice, my very humble advice would be more careful choosing partners. Or if you choose partners like China and call China as a strategic partner, so we might raise a question, I mean, with whom you want to be integrated and to be a part of. I presume that the official policy line is more with the European Union. So my kind invitation, I mean, to align yourself more with the European Union policy lines, more with our initiatives, and more with the member states' actions in this regard. So, to my mind, the alignment of Georgian policy with the European Union one is a weak point of today's Georgia's integration history. I explain it only by some political interest of the ruling party as Georgian Dream, which is very contradictory. I mean, if you follow these statements and kind of actions of some politicians from Georgian Dream, I admit I'm lost. I'm simply lost in understanding and following the logic of statements which sometimes are really designed as to provoke us in the West to make some statements or to ask for explanation. I can't explain many statements even from the recent days, for example, on the actions from the Central Bank of Georgia, what comes to some sanctioned Georgian citizens, and even going deeper into this, I mean, double citizen of Georgia and Russia. I can't explain myself why is that. I mean, why Georgia at the time when definitely clear an aligned policy line would be a big advantage for Georgia to expect favorable assessment so needed for and awaited by many people of Georgia. Why at this breaking point, the Georgian actions and decisions are still bring us, I mean, into some doubts about the sincere and full alignment, especially in foreign policy. Maybe there are other things which we do not understand completely, and I presume there are things which we are not informed about. But the recent statement by Mr. Borrell, I think, brings a lot of clarity in this regard. And his strong insistence on alignment and leaving Georgia to decide and to say a final word in this regard, I think this is the right policy line. I don't see that by our position, the European Union does not allow Georgia to align itself with the EU. No, it's a purely national position and decision by the Georgian ruling party not to align and not to follow the EU policy line. And here I come with the question. How many member states, how many candidates the EU might sustain and to remain efficient as a union in order not to probably put this non-alignment policy to the end? I don't think we need more, countries run by such prime ministers as Orban in the EU, because there are limits. There are limits, and there are limits for efficiency and strong position of the European Union we are looking for every time. So that's why, I'm very critical about non-alignment policy in foreign and security policy by Georgian side towards the European Union. I agree that there are some decisions which must be appreciated, but I take some critically important points, because those must be followed by us, assessed, and probably enforced. The minor ones, I mean, they go automatic in this regard. So that's why I don't think this is secondary, as somebody might think that, harmonization of the acquis communautaire is something what the government must busy with. It's important to harmonize your national legislation with the acquis communautaire. It's primarily important task, but this alignment brings a spirit of partnership and real trust among us. So that's why I support the view expressed by Mr. Emerson in this regard, and I believe that things must be corrected. Otherwise, I don't think we will see consistency we want, and efficient response from the EU side. Every of us is speaking about strong and ever more united Europe. So if we are to speak about this way, so let's act accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Petras, for this very interesting, input. And just to say, since we don't have a representative of Georgian government, they always claim that one of the reasons is this non-recognition of this occupied territory. So unfortunately, they are not here, but that's how they explain this non-alignment. Having said that, actually, I would like now to turn to Bidzina Levanidze for a very short intervention, just to see this from Georgian side. And then, as far as I know, Petras has to leave very soon. We have questions, actually. So I would urge you already to pose this question, and I think we already have 4 questions, and we go to the questions. So Bidzina, you have like 5 minutes for your input.
Okay, thanks very much. Then I will very briefly add few points from the Georgian perspective to what already have been said by the guests on this panel. So from Georgian perspective, I think many in Georgia still don't understand these huge changes that the EU has been undergoing after Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Zeitenwende, and the European Union slowly becoming kind of geopolitical actor and living under existential geopolitical competition. And what was possible also in terms of alignment rate, for instance, with CFSP, decisions 5 years ago, what would have been tolerated by the EU, now this is off the table. And I think this fact is not correctly understood by many in Georgian government, but also in other circles. And I think it needs also to be clearly communicated that then there can be no excuses in this regard. Now, from the Georgian perspective, I personally, I have quite a pessimistic view of the situation, and when we think about solutions, now if you use the term resilience, it's all over the place nowadays. So the Georgia's resilience of European integration is quite low nowadays, at least at the political level. Because if we look at domestic politics of Georgia, we have a government which is quite pragmatic in its foreign policy and does not have any significant normative attachment to European values and European norms. And is in a kind of regime survival mode. So they would stick to power no matter what. And they understand that getting closer to the EU, embarking on the quest of European integration, implementing those recommendations, implementing other conditions, it will weaken their grip on power, and this contradicts their major domestic political objective of remaining in power as long as possible. Easy solution in this case would be, of course, to apply more negative conditionality on government and somehow to empower alternative forces such as opposition, let's call it Medshare case. But yeah, the problem in Georgia is that Georgia nowadays resembles more Urbanian conditions of Hungary, with a strong government that has kind of managed to demonize opposition, and it's also accompanied by moderate economic success in the country and by very weak fragmented opposition, which is hunted by the shadows of the past, and they kind of have failed to reinvent it themselves and get closer to the electorate, and their agenda is very far away of what, in fact, a big part of Georgian electorate wants. And if you look at public opinion surveys, it resembles quite well there that 60% of the population is in fact quite frustrated with the government, but they don't see in opposition the solution. Yeah, I mean, in this case, it would be kind of hard to force the Georgian government to get back to the European path, and among others also how to increase the rate of alignment with EU foreign policy decisions. And yeah, I mean, even in the case that Georgia doesn't get candidate status by 2024, it's no guarantees that this will have decisive impact on the outcome of 2024 elections, since domestic political issues also matter for Georgian electorate. And at this point, we don't really know how whether this can work in a year. So okay.
For your very interesting input, because we needed that also from Georgian side. So as I said, Petras has to leave very soon. So Petras, maybe I don't know if you can read these questions, which you already have in the Q&A. If not, I will just add, I will read them loudly as well. So first question is strategic partnership with China. How it damages Georgia's alignment with CFSP, and what should Georgian government do now to mitigate the potential damaging impact of this newly emerged partnership? Then second question is from Hans-Jürgen Zahorka. Basically, is the Georgian government, in your respective opinions, aware, including the Georgian Dream, that there will be, if any, present policy forwards towards EU is kept until the relevant moment, will not be ratified by at least several EU member states' parliaments, nor possible by European Parliament? And then third question probably is about, actually this third and fourth question actually related to National Bank and recent event. Probably, I don't know how much you followed, Michael, but you know what happened, that National Bank of Georgia has changed their rules for enforcing international sanctions. This is a question from Nino Chichua. Under the new rules from NetGazeti, and under the new rules, the Georgian citizen will not face any sanctions unless they are found guilty by Georgian court. Does this decision even further decrease Georgia's alignment with EU foreign policy? Is there a possibility that this decision will impact on EU's upcoming decision on candidate status? And the fourth one by Soko Natslishvili from Formula Television TV. Not much time left before European Commission decision to grant the Georgia status of candidate country. According to latest data, 12 recommendations are yet to be implemented. Georgian Dream accuses opposition president of sabotaging European integration process, although many statement decision of the government members indicate the opposite. For example, due to the political pressure on independent institutions, as a result of which National Bank changed the approach sanctions. I think she's talking about the same thing. And basically she's asking the IMF and other international institutions express their concern about this fact. Considering this and other facts, what is the European perspective for Georgia? And probably last question from Nino Dalatishvili from Voice of America. As domestic political issues are very important for the Europeanization of Georgia, in your opinion, how correctly and relevantly does the opposition in Georgia handle it responsibly on the path of Europeanization? I think these are the questions. Then Petras, we will start from you, and then we'll continue with Michael and Bettina.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Corneli. I will be brief. Look, if I have a question, to the Georgian government. What are the expectations from the Georgian side towards China? What is in this kind of a concept of a strategic partnership you await to be fulfilled from China as well as from Georgia's side? No, look, nobody questions, that China is an important and big global player, politically and economically. But probably it's time to recognize that not everything what China does is in favor of, let's say, pro-Western oriented countries. And China remains a major rival, a major competitor to the values-based policy of the European Union. Another example, China started with One Belt, One Road project, and 17 EU or European states were very eager, and was even a group 17 plus 1. Over the time, 17 become, to my mind, already 13 plus 1, since some, especially EU member states, they didn't see any added value, to be in this project, which is about subordination to the Chinese economic interests and probably the political influences. So it's up to Georgia to decide how you will call China and what kind of a role Chinese businesses and political influences will be given within Georgia's national market. But to my mind, it's really a high time to rethink some decisions and to be a bit more cautious, seeing what China does in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and the rest. So I think, and I would appreciate Georgia calling EU as a strategic partner, as a friend, as somebody we have a trust and see our common future. The question about ratifications and so on. Look, first we have to go through the rather bumpy period of accession negotiations. And indeed, some individual member states might have some reasonable or sometimes political arguments before ratifying agreements to raise individual or group-made concerns or points. But before, look, don't look so far. We need to go through this 12 recommendations stage and then embark on accession negotiations. If we still have so-called disagreements in pre-accession, imagine what kind of the issues we might have between ourselves in accession negotiations when the process must be very efficiently managed. Affiliation increasing and integration must be on. So that's why I'm less forward-looking. I'm looking at today's situation, which brings me to less optimistic conclusions. And what is the EU prospect for Georgia? Look, EU will not change its own policy line because of Georgia. Georgia must align itself, and we hope, it's for benefits of Georgian politics, economy, and security to be a part of the European Union. So that's why things must be turned around, and we went through the same experience once going through accession negotiations, and that was our response to globalization, to the European globalization, values-based, same values for all partners and member states, and we didn't shoot not targeting the aim. We really made what we been looking at. And our experience is very positive one. So that's why we didn't ask any kind of the derivation from major EU policy line, and will be no probably any derivation given to Georgia, believe me. So the European Commission is a guardian of the EU law, and if bit by bit we destroy the kind of the solid foundation of the EU law as well as the policy line, so will be weaker European Union. We don't need weaker, less integrated European Union. We need an opposite, more united and stronger. So that's why I think we should stop looking for reasons to explain why alignment is on decrease, why we call some partners as EU at the same time having revision of its policy line towards China. big things start from small ones. So that's why let's not underestimate some decisions which are made as well, telling us that no, we applied for the European Union and we remain part of this process. I'm more practically minded man in this regard, and I hope it will be same understood in Tbilisi.
Thank you, Petras. There was also one question about National Bank. I mean, if you can very briefly touch this about if National Bank does not cancel the decision, in your opinion, what will be its consequences for Georgia? This is a question from Marika Chubinidze from Agency Accent, News Agency Accent.
Yes, Corneli. Look, I was a bit shocked by the first decision of the Central Bank of Georgia. Then I saw that there are very serious people and committed people, those who resigned from the board of the Central Bank. What is wrong? We should not personalize some decisions of the Central Bank. If we adapt such a serious institution as a Central Bank towards some individuals because of, I believe, political considerations, so there is no consistency left for such an important institution as a central bank. I hope might will take over those political considerations, and all those examples, Corneli, brings us to the point that we are starting to have more and more doubts about the not non-politically affiliated decisions, state interest-oriented decisions, and in fact, implementation of sanctions. So it's a right, I would say, ring bell at the right time for Georgia.
Thank you very much. I agree. This rings a lot of bell in regards to Georgia and especially independence of its institutions. I would like now to turn to Michael. If you had a chance to read some of these questions and if you can also come with your answers, the floor is yours. You are muted. If you don't mute.
Thanks, Cornelia. Yes, I've looked at the 8 questions and would comment on several of them. First is the China question. I'm aware that a few years ago, Georgia made a free trade agreement with China, and the idea at that time was, since Georgia also had its free trade agreement with the EU, Georgia could be a recipient of export-oriented Chinese foreign direct investment. As far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, Cornelia, but actually this dream has not materialized. And then there is currently rumors about possible Chinese participation in the proposed nuclear port on the Black Sea. Be careful. I mean, this is getting into the business of possibly Chinese-controlled strategic infrastructures. So there's a good reason to be cautious about that. There's a ratification question. Of course, this question only arises after the Treaty of Accession has been agreed and signed, and so that's a long way down the road. Doesn't arise before that. However, the issue as to whether ratification could be a hazardous process, the answer is yes. It should not be dismissed. And for those who are looking around for bits and pieces of empirical evidence, Georgians, with your DCFTA, that sailed through with ratification without a problem. But Ukraine's DCFTA and association agreement was held up for a long time because the Dutch parliament refused to ratify it. Got round that in the end, but it took a lot of time, and that is a warning there. Now, there's the question as to whether these problems we're discussing today risks blocking the chances of candidate status between now and the end of the year. We're looking at we will be looking at the Commission's voluminous package of documents due sometime in October on all of the accession candidates and applicants, and also their assessment of the system. We don't know what they will conclude, but we do read Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, State of the Union address of last week, in which, after saying, I'm afraid this is not good news I'm about to recall, whereas Ukraine and Moldova, yes, you will be in the European Union. For Georgia, she said, we are aware of the serious pro-European sentiments of the Georgian people, full stop. So that was close to being negative expressed in kind words. There's also the question about the 12 conditions set last year in order to advance the negotiations. Some of us have been watching the process, and one can say two things about it. One, the Georgian parliament and government have been extremely active in doing their best to satisfy these conditions and supplying regular updates to the European institutions as to how they are progressing in, I would say, beautifully presented documents. However, there's a but there. Unfortunately, this fine work by loyal civil servants does not get around the problem of the oligarchy and problems of functioning of democratic institutions and the rule of law, with the imprisonment of the six, Saakashvili, and various journalists still out there. And so overall, there are still serious problems in full fulfillment of the conditions as I see it.
There was also one question,
yes?
There's one question also from Nino Dalakishvili. She's asking what is the role of opposition in Europeanization process and how the opposition can contribute to handle responsibility in this process. What would be your answer on that?
Oh, maybe Petras can answer that. I didn't hear it clearly.
Petras, did you hear this question? There's the one question. What should be the role of opposition, basically? If you can just very shortly highlight.
Yes, Cornelia, I got this question. Look, opposition has own role in a political system. It must be constructively, suggesting some alternative decisions. That's the constitutional right of each and every political opposition in any democratic country. I mean, and I believe Georgia is, respecting that important constitutional principle. Political polarization, which we see, and by the way, this one of the 12 out of the 12 to decrease this political polarization, it didn't happen in Georgia, and this is probably a joint business of both. I mean, ruling party and opposition. But when you are bigger, when you are stronger, so extend the hands. I mean, create some environment for better political cooperation. So I think the initiative must come from the ruling party, and of course, opposition must respond in a constructive way, which is most important. And I appreciate highly in Georgia. This is a vibrant civic society, NGOs, independent NGOs, which provide a lot of very important and objective information about situation within Georgia. So I think we can learn very good examples from civic society in Georgia, good examples. So that's why I think that success story might be repeated towards opposition as well.
Thank you. Michael,
yes.
cut it, so you can continue. Yeah, you wanted to add something.
Yes, I'm just reading the question of Nino Narakashvili, who repeats later on, question number 9. Please, I want an answer. Okay, so the question is, how correctly and relevantly does the opposition in Georgia handle its responsibility on the path of Europeanization? As I did hint earlier, the fragmentation of the Georgian opposition these days means that collectively the opposition is not handling its responsibility on the path of Europeanization. They might have noticed the attempt by the Turkish opposition very recently to replace Erdogan. They narrowly failed. However, it was a very interesting example of multiple opposition parties actually agreeing for that purpose to come together to designate a single leader and to present a common platform. And they did pretty well, not quite well enough. But those of us who would like Georgia to advance in its Europeanization would like to see the opposition parties doing something like that. And if they're not doing something like that and going into the next election in an utterly fragmented way, that means they are not being responsible for the objective of Europeanization. I have one final comment, if I may, Corneli. It's really a very fundamental question. As we are aware that Georgia has necessarily very, very serious interests in having a workable relationship with their big neighbor, Russia, for trade, movement of persons, security, all sorts of reasons. So there is the model, there is a theoretical model of basically sitting on the fence and trying to have a decent relationship with Europe and the West, and a reasonably decent relationship with Russia. That is a theoretical model. It would be inconsistent with membership of the EU, but it could be consistent theoretically with further advances in the association agreement without membership. However, this sitting on the fence model looks more and more uncomfortable, if I can imagine the imagery. I mean, we only have to look at Armenia, your dear close neighbor, who actually have been in this business when they reneged on the association agreement and joined the Eurasian Economic Area instead, but then made an agreement with the EU that recycled those parts of the association agreement that were not incompatible with the Eurasian Economic Community membership. Well, we watch what's going on in Armenia, which of course is complicated by the terrible war with Azerbaijan. We watch on a day-by-day basis now whether the Pashinyan regime will survive much longer amidst impressions, more than impressions. The Russian government would like to see the overthrow of this excessively democratic leadership. So you see this, it's next door to you. It's a warning that sitting on the fence may not be that comfortable.
There's one more question, and then I turn very briefly to Bizina. Maybe one of you can, this is Nata Korita from Civil Georgia. She basically asking about field priority. If there's any kind of between decision, not like yes or no, what do you think? Is there such a scenario for Petras? If you are here, maybe you know if you can take that question, or Michael.
Well, Cornelia, very shortly, because I really have to leave.
Yes.
Look, if any country looking for the candidate status has serious doubts about the perspectives or country's interest, I mean, to follow that policy line, in particular Georgia, which is sandwiched between Turkey and Russia, my advice would be don't rush. If you feel you can't implement your commitments, which the European Union is about, at the best, don't reject, suspend. I mean, slow down, admit that you can't do it now, but don't be noisy and blaming others, especially the EU, for not achieving it. It probably would be less damaging strategy for the time of being, because otherwise it will be like making too much instead of strengthening partnerships and making more friends. You will fall apart from this partnership, and probably will get even some opponents increasingly in EU. So that's why slow down, don't make any hectic decisions, and all the time look at the people's expectations. I mean, Georgians are minded for Europe, so that's why it must be a big job for the government to achieve this. Thank you, Cornelia, once again.
Thank you, Petras, for your participation. I know that you have to leave. So, Bizina, just last point, because we have just a few minutes left, basically 2-3 minutes, and if we can conclude somehow.
Sure. Then I could comment probably on the last question and finish on this. So, regarding yes or no, so at this point it would be speculation, but I mean, there is some logic to saying yes, giving candidate status, because it would increase the effectiveness of conditionality, because then the incentive would be more credible, and there would be also more pressure on the government. But on the other hand, if the EU says no, it can do it without any moral hazard, and the Georgian Dream government has given it all the reasons to not to grant candidacy status to Georgia in the next 6 or 12 months. So yeah, at this point, it's unclear whether it will be yes or no. Also, very briefly on the first question, probably regarding the China, there are lots of conflicts that can arise from Georgia's partnership with China, Georgia's partnership with the European Union. Some we already mentioned. There is also famous fact that China demands from its so-called strategic partners political loyalty, for instance, voting for China's positions in United Nations General Assembly. And what happens there then if Georgia is asked, for instance, to vote for China's positions, which would directly contradict the EU positions, and also decrease probably Georgia's alignment rate with EU external decisions. And also the free trade agreements that Georgia has with China now, it probably, in theoretical case that Georgia joins the EU, it will be needed to be revoked or amended, because the European Union has its own customs union, its own commercial policy, and EU member states can't have their own free trade agreements on their terms with other states.
Thank you very much, Bizina, and thank you very much, gentlemen. Michael, thank you very much for your time, and I hope we will continue this kind of conversation, because this is what is very much needed. Thank you also for our attendees and media representatives, civil society representatives. And I see that there's some issues which is interesting for the Georgian public, and I think we will stay in tune and we will inform you about next meetings. We will continue. Thank you very much again. Have a nice day.